Hi, and welcome to Lifestyle Management. We're going to look at Chapter 14, Personal Safety. And in particular, we're going into Part 1. Okay, accidents, injuries, assault, and crimes may happen to anyone. No one is immune. I'm sure you're already familiar with that. And if you're not, that's a good thing to be aware of. If we can recognize threats of unintentional or intentional injuries, it is the first step to ensure your own personal safety. Each individual has more control of his or her own safety than anyone or anything else in his or her own life. Now, we are personally responsible, and we can be much more aware of being proactively preventative because a lot of things that could occur to us are predictable, especially when we're being proactive. If we think about what sorts of things we're involved in and are aware that living life to its fullest means taking some degree of risk. However, we can take all the steps and stay safe and prevent, and take all the steps to stay safe and prevent injuries while still having some risk in our lives. Personal safety also involves being aware of the different legislations. For driver distraction, from province to province, you'll see that in the section called Safety on the Road, we'll recognize that the differences between various heat differences, heat dangers, including heat cramps, heat stress, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. And then we're going to go look and consider the other side, looking at the sort of colder stuff. We'll consider and understand the differences between sexual victimization and sexual harassment, and sexual coercion. Sexual victimization and sexual harassment and sexual coercion will be reviewed in Part 2, and I will mention in the intro of Part 2 how I'm going to handle the topic. So let's get started in Part 1 of this chapter, tackling staying safe, and we're going to begin with personal safety. Now, personal safety, it's defined as freedom from fear or worry of physical and psychological harm. Now, this includes our awareness of situations, conditions, or events that are harmful and dangerous to our well-being. So if you're going to be engaging in an extreme skiing or parachuting or taking, some risky thing, just don't do things willy-nilly, jumping into an activity without considering, is this something I can do? Am I skilled enough to do this Black Diamond course? Should I be jumping from a plane to another plane without a parachute? You get the idea. That it's within our control and being able to be in situations, conditions, and events that we can foresee some or most of the risks we may be considering. Now, personal safety does demand an awareness of our environment and an awareness of ourselves, our capabilities, our skills, and making healthy choices. The ability to assess danger, be vigilant, avoidance, and knowing how to defend yourself. For clarity, vigilance and avoidance really just mean that you don't go into the dark areas at night by yourself, not at least without being aware that you're in some degree of risk by doing so. It doesn't mean an eventual attack, it just means to be aware and have a plan. What will I do if? For example, I've said that I run in the morning at 5:30 in the morning. Well, half of the year it's pitch black outside at that time in the morning. So to be safe, I wear bright colors with reflective details, a reflective vest, and I wear a headlamp. I've seen some risk be reduced because of that, but drivers out in the morning aren't always the most aware of where they are and how they're driving. I've had many, many close calls, but because I'm aware, I get out of the way, even though I've had cars come at me and go up on the road, onto the curb where I was, I still got out of the way. All right, so personal injury. Personal injury is the leading cause of death of children and young adults. It's also one of the major causes of short and long-term harm and disability for Canadians of all ages. Okay, now let's move into some specific areas, and we're going to start with safety at home. We spend a lot of time at home. So we'll start with safety at home. Safety at home, is that always the case? Are we always safe at home? As we spend so much time at home, maybe there are risks at home. Falls are the most common injury requiring medical attention. Falls in your home could include things like if you've been walking down your stairs and you weren't really paying attention and you've missed a couple of stairs and you've overstepped and fall to the floor. It could be overreaching on a ladder. It could be slipping on a wet floor. I mean, there's plenty. And there are a variety of ways in which we could have falls and that things could happen and cause injury in our home. Perhaps surprisingly, the third most frequent type of injury that leads to hospitalization in Canada, poisoning. Half of all household poisoning are of kids 6 years old or younger, which means they've gotten a hold of something they shouldn't have been able to get a hold of. They should have been safeguarded a lot better. Another issue regarding safety in home is fire. Fire causes many injuries resulting from 3 different ingredients: fuel, heat source, oxygen. If a fire does start, you might have only 2 to 5 minutes to get out of the building alive. Some of the things that can cause great injuries resulting from fire is people thinking they need to go back into the house and pull everything out that's memorable or of importance to them. That's not people. So be aware of how limited your time may be. You may have to exit quickly. Please consider purchasing an emergency first aid kit for your apartment, your room, your house. A fire extinguisher. If you're renting, there should already be one there. That's part of the law and the expectation. Now let's consider safety on campus. Now, I could point out we're on a small campus in Owen Sound. It doesn't really mean that we are completely safe and unaffected by personal injury. The incidences of risk on post-secondary campuses in Canada, or in the United States for that matter, no mention about campus size. So it doesn't matter what size your campus is. The most common concerns are in the residences, vehicle break-ins, poor lighting, lack of proper signage, emergency telephones, and safety issues, bullying, threats, sexual violence, and food safety. These are the most common issues around campus safety. Now let's touch on some of the effective strategies that have been put into place to build safer campus environments. Some campuses include safe walk programs, campus escort services, campus security patrol, emergency planning program, such as the ones that we have in our lockdown procedures and the fire drill procedures. Law enforcement in post-secondary schools, including Georgian College, have set up early warning systems to be in emergency situations in which a text message is sent to a cell phone and should be there. Should there be a crisis on campus, you can find that. I've put that on screen there, and you can find this on our website as well, for the Georgian College, that is. Now, safety in the workplace, it's another place where personal safety comes into play. And we spend a lot of time there, and there are three basic factors that support a safe work environment: environmental factors, personal resources, and health practices. Now, in your textbook, you'll find more detail on those 3 points. Staying safe on the job demands that we follow safety procedures and when performing the tasks that we are expected to do. In my workplace, which is the college, so when we have fire drills and lockdown drills, faculty participate in those, and it's just to make sure that our workplace is a safe environment. We have a health and safety committee that does regular tours to ensure that the place is safe. If, for example, if you're walking along through the hallways and you notice that a ceramic tile is broken, that would be brought to the committee's attention, and they would be attempting to fix that so that it wouldn't represent a walking hazard for anybody. Some workplaces, you must wear specific protective equipment when it's necessary. It's important to learn how to identify hazards, participate in safety training in workshops and courses, and learn what to do when an accident does occur. We are touching on a point made earlier: preventable and predictable. A lot of things that could happen to us, such as an injury, either unintentionally or intentionally, that we don't think will happen to us, is a faulty thinking practice. That these things may happen. It allows us to be much more proactive and preventable because we can anticipate some of these things. Now, one of the areas that we spend a lot of time in and get a lot of attention is in the media, is safety on the road. Deaths and injuries resulting from traffic collisions continue to be a major transportation safety problem in Canada. Responsibility for road safety is shared between the federal and provincial territorial levels of government. Municipalities are becoming involved in road safety through police services and injury prevention efforts. Generally, Canadians need to adopt safe driving habits, and we'll look at some of these components involved in safe driving habits. The vision of Canada's road safety strategy of 2025, its aim for them, was to have the safest roads in the world. Now, that's been a driving force for some time in Canada. The primary cause for collisions include impaired driving, speed, aggressive driving, occupant protection, and environmental factors. Now, I will touch on some of these factors in a minute. Chances are we've either seen or have been an impaired driver. We've either seen or have been with speeders or aggressive drivers. You know about the weather in our area, that snow can be huge issue. So we need to be very vigilant and aware of the safety practices. Basic precautions can greatly increase our odds of reaching our destination alive. And vehicles, of course, are equipped with seat belts, so use them. They have airbags, padded dashboards, safety glass, steel frame, and steel impact beams. All of this helps protect us against injuries or death. The size and the weight of the vehicle also certainly matters, but these don't necessarily guarantee that we'll arrive alive. It's largely our responsibility. Now we'll look at some of the driving safety and some of the risk issues, and we'll start with what I said we'd come back to, and that's like airbags. Now, what I mentioned just a minute ago, airbags supplement the protection provided by using seatbelts. They are connected to sensors that detect sudden deceleration. Children or people with small stature are vulnerable and should be seated in the back seat of a vehicle, especially if they have airbags installed. Airbag systems of the future are already being developed, and they're going to be known as what they call smart airbags. They'll possess some sort of two-level activation, and we'll see more about this as it emerges in our car systems. Now, I'm sure you're very familiar, as you've been through high school, even in public school, drug and alcohol awareness programs. Now, although there has been a downward trend in the rate of impaired driving incidences over the past 20 years, alcohol is still a contributing factor to road fatalities. Male drivers do account for the majority of fatal injuries who have had been drinking. Age does matter, as well as with the highest percentage of drivers being between the ages of 26 and 35% of Canadian drivers were reported driving that they were thought were impaired. Now that is the number of reported. It's not including those that didn't say that they did. So when we see that number, it's great. People are acknowledging that that's what they're doing, but then they ought to be much more thoughtful. Own your own family, yourself, everyone else on the road is at risk when we take those risks ourselves. So one study of full-time college students revealed that 20% of students drove after drinking some amount of alcohol. 10% drove after 5 or more drinks. Now, one of the things I do remember when I was in class doing teaching for the first 15 years, I did teach in the Police Foundations program, and I would ask the students to raise their hand when I would ask the question, how many of you here would in fact choose to drink and drive? Raise your hand. Well, as you'd expect, no one acknowledged they would drink and drive. Then I would ask the question, how many of you have drank one beer and then drove? Well, with this question, a few hands would go up. My point would be, it would seem to make sense that one drink clouds our vision. If we said we wouldn't do it and we raised our hand and yet after one beer we did drive, then it would suggest that psychological effect of having a beer at least affected I would still drive. Or somebody would say, well, I'm a big guy. One beer, it won't affect me. Just having one. If you would raise your hand saying that it was wrong, it seems that either the alcohol or the psychosocial variables may have impacted your decision. See the figure 14.1 for the data on police-reported impaired driving in Canada. A growing movement of young people, and you might be aware of MAD Thompson, Youth in Canada, Students Against Impaired Driving, are doing a lot to educate students about the consequences of drinking and driving. So, talking about it, engaging one another about the importance of, designating one as the designated driver. I've been a designated driver for over 35 years. I will gladly not drink if driving my friends home will make a difference. I've done that for years and years, and I'm happy that my friends are all still alive as a result. We will also consider the impact of drugs. Legalization of marijuana in Canada occurred in October 2018. We will see more about what kind of impact this is going to have on drugs, the impact of drugs on traffic accidents. There is more that we don't know. However, the data is starting to come in. What we do know, in 2012, 40% of Canadian drivers who were fatally injured tested for drugs were found to be positive for drugs. Now, we'll probably learn more about what kinds of strategies that we'll be able to use to test somebody for drug use while driving. There are methods out already. The Criminal Code of Canada permits police to lay charges of impaired driving if they believe the person's ability to operate the vehicle has been impaired by either alcohol or drugs. For alcohol, I'm sure you're familiar that it's a 0.08 blood alcohol level is too much. There is not a similar test yet that's reliable currently for specific drugs. However, some form of measures are available for marijuana. Are available before marijuana was legalized. And of course, another current safety issue, of course, is cell phones and distracted driving. Cell phones have been cited as a major contributing factor to motor vehicle accidents. Drivers using cell phones while driving are 3 to 4 times more likely to be in a car crash than drivers who are focused on the road. Now, there's a very significant reason why. If you text and drive, all right, you're more than 23 times more likely to have a collision than drivers who don't text and drive. 23 times more. And there's a reason. And it's really just basic physics. Texting a message takes your eyes off the road for an average of 4.6 to 6 seconds, out of 6 seconds. So 4.6 out of 6 seconds. All right? If you're on the highway, you travel for the length of a football field in 4.6 seconds, which is about 100 meters. Lots can happen when your head is down and your eyes are away from that length of time on a highway. It's not a surprise that the incidence of distracted driving accidents is way up. We all have likely seen or experienced either accidents or near accidents involving the use of texting or talking on a cell phone while driving. A few years ago, I left Georgian College and drove to Tim Hortons around the corner there, and at a set of lights by the residence there, I was stopped waiting for the lights to change. I could see this truck coming behind me, and it didn't look like it was going to stop. I could see the driver was texting. Her head was down. I braced myself for a crash because I expected it was going to happen, but she braked suddenly, screeched to a halt. I gave her a look as we drove away, and I noticed she had vanity plates, and I could see her name, and it was a student of mine. So I did go talk to her and said, "You almost hit me back end of my car, and I could see you were on your phone. Please stop texting and driving." College students report 21% of the accidents or near accidents that they have experienced involved at least one driver using a cell phone. That's 1 in 5 students have reported that. And like I've said before, it's only the reported number. Many provinces have put legislation in place to either ban or limited the use of a variety of handheld devices. And you'll find that on your text, Table 14.1 and Table 14.2, and there you'll find the current legislation regarding distracted driving and fines by province. I think I've got them beside me here as well, but you'll find them in your text. Okay, seatbelts and safe driving. Young males ages 18 to 24 are the least likely to wear seatbelts. Young drivers who drive late at night and those who have passengers who are under the age of 29 years of age or have passengers who have been drinking. These individuals tend not to be wearing seatbelts either. National collision data revealed that approximately 58.5% of all fatal injured drivers and passengers and almost 27.5% of those who are seriously injured were not wearing seatbelts at the time of the collision. Now, I know there's an old school belief that by not wearing a seatbelt, if you're ever in a collision, you'll just jettison out of the vehicle away from any injury. And that's just not the case. When you wear the lap shoulder belt properly, They reduce the risk of fatal injuries to the front seat passenger by 45% and the risk of moderate to critical injury by 50%. Wear your seat belts. It's important. The way I look at it, I wouldn't put my child into a car without a seat belt. Why would I go and do that for myself? Because, well, I'm a father, and if I go without a seatbelt and I'm in an accident and die, I have left my child without a father. Wear your seatbelts. Another one close to my heart is cycling. Cycling safety. About 7,500 cyclists are injured each year in Canada. Most injuries suffered by bicyclists are fractures, dislocations, and other non-threatening injuries. Not surprisingly, head injuries are the most dangerous that can be largely prevented by wearing a helmet. But it kind of depends on how hard you're being hit. Certainly, it depends on how hard you've been hit your head as to how much the helmet will help. However, getting a certified helmet is better than just buying any old helmet or at a garage sale. It might cost you a bit more, but it's a good helmet and it's your head. The money is worth it. Alcohol is another factor for cycling injuries and fatalities. If you're going to ride a bicycle for sport or commute, use the road smarts. Obey the rules of the road. You cycle with the traffic. So you're on the right side of the road going with the traffic. Don't ride your bicycle into traffic. You can only walk as a pedestrian into traffic, like along the same side of the road as the traffic. Equipment. So equip your bike with a horn, lights, and reflective gear, particularly if you're going to be riding a bike at night. Ride defensively. Look around. Be alert to your surroundings. Fit your bike correctly. That just means don't get a bike that's too big for you, where the pedals are tough to reach, or too small, where you can't extend your legs particularly well. Keep your bike well maintained. These are all going to help with cycling safety. Let's now consider safety and recreational activities. Sport and recreational activities, as with many other sport and recreation options, we need to keep in mind that injuries here are also preventable and even in some cases predictable. We'll look at a variety of recreational activities and the need to regularly keep in mind equipment, keep safety equipment, and the environmental issues. To be proactive in protecting ourselves and to be able to enjoy the activity for life, not risk our lives. If you're going to participate in outdoor sports or field trips, think ahead. Manage your risks. In 2016 to 2017, nearly 1/3 of serious head injuries occurred while skiing or snowboarding. Now, not everybody is going to fall and do damage. However, wear protective equipment, including specifically designed helmets, that can reduce severity and the risk of fatal injuries. Snowmobiling leads to more serious injuries than any other sport, and injuries and deaths from snowmobile accidents in North America are on the rise. They're on the rise partly because more people are engaging in snowmobiling. It's a fun activity and there's lots of trails. But it doesn't mean it's a speedway. I've had 2 friends who have died on snowmobiles from going too fast and not being able to evade an obstacle. Boating is another great sport. I've done a lot of boating, canoeing, and kayaking, and boating is one of the number 1 causes of, you can imagine, drowning in Canada. Wear a life jacket. There's a huge program to encourage people to wear a life jacket or personal safety device if you have a boat. Since 2002, all operators of personal watercraft must have proof of competency. It's also important to remember that driving a boat under the influence of alcohol or drugs is a criminal offense. It hasn't always been, but it is certainly today. All right, let's consider sports and physical activity on college and university campuses. Now, students can participate in a whole variety of intramural activities. Fitness classes, recreational or intercollegiate even, often deal with a number of musculoskeletal and traumatic brain injuries. Most common are ankle and knee, shoulder injuries are the most common. Number one brain injury are concussions. These can be mild or severe, or can be made worse by having multiple over time. Education is needed to assist in a better protection of student athletes. Next, we can touch on two conditions that Canadians, we need to be prepared for: hot and cold temperatures. In the summer, it's hot. So handling the heat is important. Non-impact based risks we need to consider here in Canada. We'll look at 4 heat concerns: heat cramps, heat stress, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. Heat cramps are caused by hard work and heavy sweating in the heat. Check out table 14.3. I've got it here beside me. Heat stress can occur simultaneously or afterwards as blood vessels try to keep the body temperature down. And then heat exhaustion is the result of prolonged sweating with inadequate fluid replacements. That's why it's so important to keep hydrated. If you're doing activities in the heat, for example, when I go on runs, anything over 8 kilometers, I'm bringing water with me, and I'm bringing electrolytes. On my long runs, I go about 18 to 20K. I bring 4 6-ounce bottles of water. 2 of them will have electrolytes in them. 2 of them will just be plain water. I'm not going to be out there somewhere 12 kilometers away and then have heat exhaustion. It's hard to recover from that. Heat stroke is a life-threatening medical emergency caused by the breakdown of the body's mechanisms for cooling. It's important that we manage heat. Now, the other alternative while living in Canada is coping with the cold. Heat isn't the only issue to prepare for and to cope with in Canada. We also get to enjoy the cold. The cold comes with some risks. The tips of our toes and fingers, ears, nose, chin, cheek are the most vulnerable to exposure, especially in high winds, high wind speeds, and in low temperatures. It can result in what's known as frost nip. Frost nip is not nearly as significant or severe as a more severe form of what is known as frostbite. Frostbite can be either superficial. A superficial frostbite is the freezing of the skin, and it's characterized by a sort of a waxy look and a firmness on the skin, although the tissue below is still soft. Now, deep frostbite, that's very different. That's the freezing of skin, muscle, even freezing of the bone, and it requires medical treatment. This occurs when the body's temperature falls below 35 degrees centigrade. That's about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The body is capable of rewarming itself under frostbite in those conditions, the body is incapable of rewarming itself because the breakdown of the internal system that is managing our temperature. This state is known as hypothermia. Hypothermia requires emergency medical attention to keep the victim warm. Do not give them alcohol. Alcohol does not help. Okay. That brings us to the end of part 1. Now, please check out part 2 of this on unintentional accidents and intentional injuries due to living in a dangerous world. And I hope that you take some time to consider some of the issues and some of the safety issues to make them a part of your life so that you can enjoy life without undue risk. All right? Thank you. We'll see you in part 2. Bye now.